And hello again, everybody. I'm Bob Ramsey, and it is time for the Keith Costas podcast with our star, Keith Costas from MLB Network. Keith, how are you today?
I'm good, Rammer. How you doing?
Doing very well. Well, now we're heating it up into the meat of the baseball season. And to get things going on MLB Network, we've got Cardinals, Braves, two teams that were figured to be battling for the top of their division. And I would think that both teams feel like they've underachieved a little bit to this point.
Yeah, definitely. It's the first time we've had the Cardinals on our air. I mean, we've had games that we've picked up from the regional sports networks on. They cover all the teams that way too, but actually covering a game with our own production team, it's the first time we've had the Cardinals. So always kind of fun to dig in on a team that you're keeping track of anyways. But yeah, Rammer, I would agree with your statement. Obviously, Cardinals fans know that the last couple of weeks have not gone as they would have liked and dragging down towards 500 now, but the Braves certainly fit that same bill. I mean, they have not been over 500 all year. They've gotten there 5 or 6 times, but for whatever reason, they just haven't been able to get any kind of traction. So since they were last at 500, I think it was 29-29, they've lost 6 of their last 8, obviously. Beat the Cardinals last night. Recording this on Friday is one of the exceptions. But yeah, you look around the league, I mean, baseball's a tough sport to predict, but how many teams are there that we were pretty certain would, if not win the division, be right there and not really have any kind of thought about being out of contention? But I mean, the Cardinals are sort of trending in that direction. The Braves have been in that spot. The Yankees certainly have been in that spot. The Dodgers are obviously still one of the better teams, but the Giants come out of nowhere and have been in the driver's seat in that division for a good portion of the season. So yeah, you look around the league and there really aren't that many teams outside of maybe the White Sox and the A's that expected to be there that are in the position right now where they hope to end the season.
Might be an oversimplification, but I know you'll break it down for me as I cover the Cardinals every day. To me, the concern of not having depth in the offseason, that concern has been borne out to be a reality. With so many injuries, they don't have capable backups, at least at this point in time. The Braves, is it as simple as losing their cleanup hitter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another big similarity with these teams. And it was such a weird offseason, really each of the last 2 off seasons, but certainly coming off of the COVID season last year. There were a lot of teams that it felt like had obvious moves or at least sensible moves right in front of them that for whatever reason, a circumstance of having trouble projecting off of last year's kind of quirky season, or maybe the financial implications of having no fans in the stands and the looming CBA issues, who knows? It's a number of factors, but yeah, you look at the Cardinals and what were most people saying going into the season, they could use one more starter, maybe go out and get Jake Odorizzi. Well, that's bared out, like you said. And then with the Braves, they let Mark Melancon walk out of their bullpen for $3 million to San Diego. He's leading the major leagues in saves right now. And the Braves bullpen is a train wreck. I mean, they had other guys that they brought back and brought in that they expected to perform better, but kind of the same deal as the Cardinals in the rotation with the Braves bullpen in terms of having an obvious need in the offseason that was not addressed that has come up and snake bitten them. Same thing. We talked about the Yankees, their rotation, same kind of deal. So you see that trend around the league. But yeah, you mentioned the cleanup hitter who Cardinal fans are obviously familiar with, but the Braves missing Ozuna, missing their starting catcher. We did on Melancon, missing last year's opening day starter, Mike Soroka, who's been gone for so long at this point, it's almost an afterthought. He was banged up last season too. So yeah, the Braves have a lot of holes, and we've talked the last couple of weeks, Rammer, about the trade market and how it's going to be tough to navigate because so many teams, like we're talking about, are in similar positions. I mean, the Braves are in a really tough spot because they have so many different needs. It's not like they just have one area they need to address. They got all kinds of different spots to address, so they're definitely in a tough spot.
So when you and your inner sanctum guys at MLB Network get together off camera, behind the scenes, what do you think? Which of these two teams, and maybe it'll come up on the telecast tonight on MLB, which team is most capable and, in your view, most willing and able to pull the trigger on some deals?
Well, I think that the Cardinals have some really good players in their system at the top, but Mozeliak talked about it the other week. There's maybe a gap that you wouldn't like to see when you're trying to construct these deals between their top end prospects and the depth in their system. So unless the Cardinals are willing to part with some of these bigger pieces, the names that we're familiar with, the Gormans, the Liberators, the Thompsons, which I don't think they want to do. I mean, maybe Gorman, there's an issue with the positional fit, but we have to figure the DH is coming sooner rather than later. Right. I don't think they're going to part with those guys. So it's kind of hard to look in the crystal ball and see how they're going to put a deal together. So I guess I would lean towards the Braves, maybe being a little bit better position. But like we just talked about, I don't know if they're in a better position to get a catcher, a cleanup hitter, and a starting pitcher. So I guess the Cardinals would be in better position to address their needs. The Braves might have a little more prospect capital to spend, but not enough to cover all of their different needs, if that makes sense.
History tells me that John Mozeliak will find a minor deal or two to sort of be stopgap and hope that injured guys get healthy and can contribute. That's an overstatement and a generalization, but I think that sort of is John Mozeliak's MO.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you saw, talk about an under the radar move or a minor move. You saw Wade LeBlanc's name come across the wire the other day, and he got right into a game. And honestly, I wasn't sure. I figured they'd use him out of the bullpen, but that's the kind of move that teams are looking at right now, a kind of veteran retread. Maybe they see something in his repertoire that they can change, and he can give you a few spot starts here and there. But yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, Mo has said as much himself, kind of the theme we just hit on, that it's either part with those top end prospects or dig deeper into the system. And I'm just not sure that they have those mid-tier, kind of upper mid-tier players that bring that sort of player from, right below the star level player. Part with the, think about the deal they made where like they let like a Magneuris Sierra go, like that type of deal. They don't have that type of player in the system. It doesn't seem. I'm sure there's guys we haven't heard of that will poke up, eventually when they get their chance and establish themselves as major leaguers, but they don't really have a surplus of guys that you look at and say, that's definitely a major leaguer in some capacity. Maybe he's a fourth outfielder, maybe he's a bench guy, whatever. But I think they just have those star kind of, star capable type of prospects and nothing behind it that really intrigues teams. So hard to forecast without knowing exactly what a specific team's needs is that would be dealing with them.
So two teams on MLB Network tonight, and the Cardinals and the Braves. Let's talk about another team, two other teams getting together that have a more fun little drama that we can conjure up between the Astros and the White Sox, two teams that are really playing good baseball. And without a trash can, the Astros are still absolutely raking. The White Sox are playing good baseball. They're matching up, and it's two cranky old men. I say that affectionately because I love them both, in Tony La Russa and Dusty Baker.
Well, that was the first thing that jumped out. I mean, I think any baseball fan kind of understands that these are two of the older managers that we've seen in the history of the game. But I was shocked when I read the other day that this is actually the oldest matchup in any of the four major sports between managers or head coaches ever. Never before have you seen a couple 72-year-olds leading the teams. I mean, I would have thought for sure that back in the, traveling by train straw hat days, there were a couple old guys hanging on. I mean, everyone thinks of Connie Mack, but I guess it takes two to tango with a note like that there was never two guys 72 or older in any of the sports. I mean, football too. I would have thought that way back in the day, there were some old crotchety football coaches with the leather helmets that have been hanging around forever, but no, we've never seen guys at this age match up. And obviously Cardinal fans know they haven't exactly been the best of friends on the field at time. I mean, La Russa managed him at the end of Dusty's career in Oakland, but we've seen plenty of spats between these two over the years. And like you said, both teams are playing really, really well. The Astros, you said it, they are just absolutely raking. Altuve looks like Altuve of old the last couple of weeks. He's scorching hot. They've won 8 of their last 10. And we've talked about the White Sox. They continue to just keep it rolling. I think maybe a month ago now, I mentioned this note to you, Rammer, that they had only lost 3 games in a row once all season. They haven't done it since. So they've only lost 3 games in a row once all year, back-to-back losses, maybe 5-6 times. So that is a good way to make sure you stay in first place by limiting those losing streaks. And that's what La Russa has been able to do. So yeah, fun matchup there. And you think about where they're at right now. If the season ended today, the White Sox would be waiting to play the winner of the Red Sox and the Astros. Both of them pretty appealing matchups because you got Dusty and Tony, or you've got Alex Cora and Tony, who many people thought should have been the manager in Chicago. So it would be fun to see that series play out too.
And 3 great offensive teams.
Yeah, for sure. Lots of offense in that one. I mean, the Red Sox, you just saw what they did to the Braves right before this Cardinals series started. The Red Sox are rolling. That whole AL East, really, that's, from the Yankees perspective, you look at the Red Sox and the Blue Jays at the top of that division, man, that is a murderer's row that they've got brewing in the Northeast.
Yeah, just in a quick background for viewers that aren't aware, the Dusty and Tony thing goes back a long, long way. And I think there's great respect between the two. What I love about them and what caused occasional conflicts on the field has been that they're both such intense competitors that they won't concede anything to the other.
Absolutely.
And they're two guys that you absolutely can root for, but they'll also get under your skin. So you got all those dynamics going, which I think makes it a fun lineup or matchup, and two absolute pros. And obviously the length of their careers proves that they are.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I still love seeing Dusty running around with the wristbands on. He's got the yellow ones going now, even more flair than he used to back in his Cubs and Reds days. So, but yeah, that's what I was kind of saying all offseason when so much skepticism, sprouted up around the La Russa hire. And it hasn't been all smooth sailing, as we've talked about a few different times now. There's been some missteps, or at the very least some drama in Chicago. But my thing all along was that the overriding characteristic about Tony La Russa, if you followed his career, is just that ultra competitiveness. Now, not to disrespect anybody else, these guys are professional athletes with a lot on the line. They all compete. They're all competitors for the most part. It's few and far between that you get a guy that just shows up to cash a check and gets by on natural talent. But Tony, as you know, is at the far upper end of the spectrum of competitiveness. And I always thought that his players would see that right away in Chicago, and whatever rust or generational gap there was would be overridden by that kind of will to just do whatever it takes to compete and win the game. And I think that that's kind of what you're seeing play out. Some bumps along the way, but bottom line, they're rolling. And it doesn't seem like Tony La Russa being in the dugouts held them back at all.
One of my favorite things about Tony, just from being around him all those years, was it became a bit, but he wanted to let you know that it only mattered if he won or lost. Anytime you would see him pregame, it could be 3:00 in the afternoon or 6 or whatever for a night game. Hey, Tony, how's it going? I'll let you know at 10:30.
Right.
And that was his deal.
He can push it back to 11 with the way these games go now. But yeah, same line still applies, I think.
That's exactly right. So what's the latest as a MLB Network analyst? What's the latest on spin rates? Are we looking at those changing?
They have been changing. I know everyone has been beaten over the head with the spin rate talk the last couple of weeks, but it's hard to ignore all the chatter around the league, and the numbers certainly bear it out. You look at it in kind of 10-day increments over the last 30 days or so, and it started to trend down a little bit, about a month ago. And then the last 10 days or so, since this has all been going on, it's impossible to ignore. It's about 100 RPM drop across the league in terms of the spin rate on the four-seam fastball. I mean, I know the numbers, or even for me, who's looking at it every day, the numbers can be confusing. It's not like we have been dealing with this stuff for a long time. It's not the same as throwing out a batting average number, an on-base number, and kind of knowing what that means in context. But 100 is a pretty significant number when you're talking about a sample size that covers the whole league. So it's pretty clear that pitchers have backed off. And, I think the most interesting thing and the most troubling thing about the last week is what happened with Tyler Glasnow. I mean, how much did we talk about over the last year, 18 months, all of the things that baseball can potentially do to get offense back in the game? And the one that people tended to really latch onto just because it was so radical was the idea of moving the mound back in some of these other leagues as a breeding ground. And people were up in arms about, you're going to injure the pitchers, it's too dangerous. And now we see something that people didn't really associate as an injury risk right away. One of the premier pitchers in the league who acknowledged he had been using sunscreen and rosin, so technically overstepping the lines, maybe not to the spider tack level and the lab created levels of some of the sticky stuff that we've read about, but acknowledged he was at least doing something that was technically out of bounds. I mean, you see him go down, that's tough. That's tough. And to see him speak as passionately as he did about it, I think was a pretty big wake-up call, even for people that have been following this story closely.
So really get into the analyst hat for me so I can understand. You're talking about spin rate on the four-seam fastball. Mm-hmm. Is that where the stickiness is best used, or is it on cutters and breaking balls? Is that where it's most effective?
I think it's effective with everything. I mean, the numbers bear it out. You look again at the league as a whole, the increasing spin rate on any of these pitches, the batting average goes down. Fastball, breaking ball, off-speed pitches, all of them. I think it's just easier from kind of a standpoint of just analyzing a big data set to look at fastballs, just because there's less variance. Guys generally grip the four-seam fastball as a four-seam fastball. It's a standard grip, and it's a kind of uniform way of looking at things. Whereas you look at some of these other pitches, the way that StatCast does it is they look at the spin axis and the RP, and they basically put all the data in buckets, and that's how they categorize a pitch. But as you know, I mean, you watch a game or you watch it follow on game day, maybe it pitch registers as a curveball, it was really a slider, or a cutter registers a cutter, it was really a slider. So it's harder, I guess, to analyze that data looking at breaking balls, just because there's more variance between the pitchers. But to answer your actual question, I think that the breaking balls is where you get more of an effect necessarily than the fastballs. I mean, the breaking stuff, the sliders and the curveballs are greatly affected by this tacky stuff. And you've seen it with the numbers. A guy like Glass now up over 3,000 RPMs with his curveball is, no one knew what that meant 5 or 6 years ago, but that is like a gaudy, otherworldly, upper echelon of human capability type of number, and it just can't be done without the assistance of these foreign substances. So yeah, the breaking balls are where they get the most benefit, but really any pitch is helped out by it.
And finally, just, is there any even back chatter behind the scenes about what we think we might see coming up, with whether it's enforcement or some more or different specificity on exactly what's allowed, what's not allowed? Is there any evolution on that?
Well, I think that's what has most of the players up in arms, is that, I mean, in addition to it being enacted in the middle of the season, which most people tend to agree is a less than ideal situation, but the way it's going to be enforced is that the umpires are just going to check for any type of sticky or foreign substance, and that has the players, the pitchers specifically, pretty upset that there's not going to be any kind of differentiation between rosin and sunscreen, or just sunscreen, or whatever the normal kind of misdemeanors are, and something that's more advanced, like that spider tack that everyone's been talking about, that was originally created for the strongman competitions with the 600-pound Norwegians lifting anvils over their head, or whatever it is they do. So I don't think a 1-pound baseball is really what was meant for that substance. But yeah, I mean, we'll see next week, I guess, because starting Monday, umpires are going to have, I mean, they've always had the ability to remove somebody from a game. We've seen it, fairly recently, within the last 10 years or so, a handful of times. Michael Pineda, it happened to him in a game we did maybe 6-7 years ago, where he had pine tar in his neck and got ejected. But I guess we'll find out on Monday, and it's kind of the great unknown. This is your, if you're a StatCast spin rate kind of pitching savant kind of guy, this is it's your big last hurrah this weekend. Get your spin rates in while you can, because come Monday, the umpires are going to be on the lookout.
Yeah, and I just hope somewhere in what could be a dark moment for baseball, we have something like from the 70s, Joe Niekro flipping the nail file out of his pocket and trying, what, me?
It would be a good time while everyone's looking this way to just get the old belt buckle out, or, maybe just go to a generic spitball like it's 1915. Just,
that's exactly.
Use your own bodily fluids. They can't track that quite as easily.
Oh, well, we're looking forward to a great matchup tonight for MLB Network with the Cardinals and the Braves in Atlanta. Keith, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week on the Keith Costas podcast.
Thanks, Rammer.